In my biased opinion, the best is yet to come. We've got an amazing speaker coming up in a few minutes. And in the meantime, actually, what time is it? Someone shout out to me. Oh, 3:15. Oh, okay, cool. That's good. Yeah, it's all good. Hang on a second. Experiencing some technical difficulties. Yeah, what's up? Oh, everything's cool. All right, he's having a good time. Yeah, who's here for day 2? Who came here yesterday, here again? Epic. Best food you've eaten so far? The Euros? Is that what you said? The Euros are definitely the most popular pick of the day. Did anybody have the cookie ice cream sandwich? Oh, yeah. Yeah, we got a lot of good stuff here. There's something for everybody. What? V-Spot Pizza. Did anybody have the pizza? Probably up there the best vegan pizza I've ever had in my damn life. All right, everybody. I'm really glad to introduce our next speaker. Someone who I have a huge amount of respect and admiration for. No doubt about it when it comes to the animal rights movement. Chris Delforce, our next speaker, has one of the toughest jobs of all, by far. And the work he does makes possible for all the other activists out there to be more educated and have more ammunition to help educate and encourage change in the public. Chris Delforce is the founding director of animal rights charity Aussie Farms. After releasing a documentary about Australian pig farming titled Lucent, Chris's home was raided by police, leading to Australia's first ever ag-gag trial. A second documentary, Dominion, was released earlier this year and explores the many ways animals are routinely exploited and abused by humans. He openly tackles the myth that animal abuse doesn't happen here. Make some noise if you've watched Dominion. Then I'm sure you'll understand at least some of what had to go into collecting the footage for this documentary and the hundreds of hours over years that went into putting this documentary together. One of the hardest jobs in the animal rights movement, no doubt about it. Please show a warm welcome full of gratitude and respect to our next speaker, Chris Delforce.
Thank you. I have always held a belief that most people are inherently good, that animal cruelty, suffering, and abuse is not something that they would willingly support. Industries that use animals, whether it's for food, clothing, entertainment, or research, depend on their customers not knowing what they're paying for, appeasing them with marketing slogans like high welfare, humane, free range, organic. When I first started going to farms and slaughterhouses almost 8 years ago, I had no idea what I was doing or what I'd find. I didn't know what a farrowing crate was or a bolt gun or controlled atmosphere killing. I'd seen a bit of footage of these kinds of places. I'd watched Earthlings, but it was from overseas. And we were always told that things were different here in Australia, that our animals are treated with love and respect, that animal cruelty just doesn't happen in our farming sector. And if it does, it's an isolated incident, a rogue operator, quickly identified and harshly dealt with by authorities. Beyond this image of rolling green hills and happy animals loved and cared for until it was their time to repay us, there was no way for people to see for themselves the reality behind the neatly packaged products on supermarket shelves. In 2012, a friend and I discovered a piggery just 20 minutes from the border of our town and thought one night that we'd go have a look. I'd been doing rescues inside chicken, turkey, and egg farms for over a year, but other than saving individual lives, there'd been no real direction or greater purpose to what we were doing. I'd never been inside a pig farm. I took an old mini DV tape camera that I'd found in my closet, although in my nervousness I accidentally left it in the car. We found row after row of mother pigs confined to small cages for weeks at a time, in which they could only stand up, lie down, or take 1 or 2 steps forwards or backwards, unable to turn around. Piglets sick or dying, their tails cut off by workers without pain relief, and dead ones lying next to their mothers or in the aisles or collected into buckets outside. Older pigs packed together in their own waste in small concrete pens. That first night when I walked out of the farrowing shed, there was something burning inside me that I'd never felt before. I turned to my friend and said, "We're going to shut this place down." We returned numerous times over 2 months, a small team of us, gathering as much evidence as we could to submit to the authorities and to show the world, upgrading somewhere along the way to a slightly newer but still very cheap handycam, and I quickly taught myself how to edit the footage together. We learned how to install hidden cameras, capturing workers kicking piglets like footballs and throwing them across the aisles while their mothers watched helplessly. Behind the farrowing shed one night, we found a slaughter room, and sitting in its doorway, a wheelbarrow overflowing with entrails and empty beer bottles littering the floor. So we put our hidden cameras in there too, revealing how every Friday the owner of the piggery would bludgeon pigs with a sledgehammer before cutting their throats, some taking over 6 minutes from that first hit to finally die. When we released all of the footage, the public outcry was massive. There was extensive coverage across mainstream media, including primetime TV and radio news. People were shocked that this was happening in their own country. While we'd initially given the footage to the RSPCA, who had the power to seize the animals, lay charges against the owners, and effectively shut the place down, very little action was taken for a long time, but eventually the public pressure forced them to initiate criminal proceedings with 53 charges of animal cruelty. All charges were later withdrawn after the state government intervened. The industry responded to the footage by distancing themselves from the facility and its owners, claiming that it was a rogue operator, a one-off, not representative of their industry. So we set out to prove them wrong. And one by one, we exposed the same conditions, the same practices in pig farm after pig farm, 50 of them over 2 years. Occasionally, we turn our attention to other species, meat chickens known as broilers, and turkeys who are bred to grow so large and so fast that their legs can't support their weight. Ducks, aquatic animals who are farmed without access to water. And the slaughterhouses where they would all end up, regardless of any minute differences in how they're raised. We learned that the most common method of stunning pigs is the use of carbon dioxide gas chambers, and we managed to hide cameras inside the gas chamber at the largest pig slaughterhouse in the Southern Hemisphere, capturing for the first time the reality of a system that had been called humane for over 20 years. Every pig who enters that chamber screams and thrashes in agonizing pain for over 30 seconds. The carbon dioxide reacts with the mucous membranes in their eyes, sinuses, and lungs, turning to carbonic acid while they suffocate, pushing their noses through the bars of the gondola cages, desperately gasping for air as they are lowered deeper into the gas. We then captured the same thing at 4 other large slaughterhouses, including Big River Pork here at Murray Bridge. The footage was seen by tens of millions of people worldwide, the first time consumers were able to see this process for themselves. I collated all of this material into a documentary called Lucent, released in late 2014, and around 8 months later, my home was raided by about a dozen police who took everything: computers, hard drives, cameras, documents, clothing. Over those 2 years of documenting pig farms, there were numerous occasions where we'd come across animals who were in urgent need of veterinary care. Sows with massive maggot-infested prolapses. Another sow who'd given birth to a litter of stillborns, leading to paralysis in her back legs, and when she couldn't pull herself to the food and water at the front of her cage, she began eating her own legs. At one large piggery, highly regarded by the industry, our hidden cameras were found and a trap was set for our return, leading to a group of 8 workers hunting us for 5 hours and trashing my car. On each of these occasions, we went to the police and we were ignored. But for my troubles, for my attempt to alert consumers to what they were paying for, my attempts to basically make the world a slightly better place, I was lectured, belittled, and filmed as my home was torn upside down, and then sent through the court system like any other criminal, while the perpetrators of everything we'd witnessed and filmed were allowed to continue operating, some painted as the victims of vegan extremists, or as community heroes and leaders in animal welfare. Our government, under pressure from the animal agriculture industry, was trying to make an example of us, to stymie the release of footage that had embarrassed and undermined them and their marketing slogans for so long. And for a few days after the raid, I felt like it had worked. I wanted to give up. I couldn't think properly. I was just angry and confused and kept thinking about all the footage I'd lost because I didn't have it backed up anywhere. Stories I'd never be able to tell. Suffering witnessed only by me, now meaningless. One night when I couldn't sleep, I got in my car and drove for a couple hours to a pig slaughterhouse, hoping to see the trucks being unloaded so I could remind myself of what this was all about. And on the way, I was listening to the new album by Of Monsters and Men, and a song came on called Thousand Eyes, performed earlier by Renee, which was amazing. That song was exactly what I needed to hear at the time. I returned home, re-downloaded all the footage that I'd published, and by morning had cut it into a 4-minute video set to that song. And that video became the basis for new kinds of street outreach. Activist groups were taking it to universities and shopping centres, giving out $1 or a vegan cupcake to any member of the public who could watch it the whole way through. Most didn't accept the $1, many went vegan. Then people started lining up outside fast food restaurants, holding open laptops showing the video to passers-by. And then a new group, Anonymous for the Voiceless, started up in Melbourne with the Thousand Eyes video at its centrepiece, going on to start chapters all over the world, creating countless numbers of vegans and proving just how powerful a thing it can be to simply present good people with the truth. In October 2015, a few months after the raid, I was formally charged with 17 counts of break and enter to commit serious indictable offence, each count for a separate pig farm or slaughterhouse, carrying a maximum penalty of 14 years in prison. My response this time was to launch a crowdfunding campaign for a new film entitled Dominion, which would go far beyond what Lucent did. So instead of backing down and succumbing to intimidation, we ramped up our efforts, capturing and exposing to millions the maceration of day-old male chicks in the egg industry who are considered useless because they can't lay eggs. And then we stormed that facility and physically shut down the macerator, chaining onto the conveyor belts and bringing out over 150 male chicks who had been seconds from death. We exposed the repeated impregnation of cows in the dairy industry and the slaughter of their unwanted male calves, them considered useless because they can't produce milk. The factory farming of fish and the apparently humane slaughter method of freezing them to death. Captive lions, tigers and primates living a life of extreme boredom and frustration for the entertainment of paying spectators. We exposed with our hidden cameras slaughterhouse after slaughterhouse, reinforcing that for every one of these thinking, feeling beings sent through those doors, there is always fear, there is always pain, never a willingness or desire to die, and never a humane way to kill someone who wants to live. We did eventually shut down that first piggery, not because we gave the footage to the authorities, but because we published it. The pressure became too much for the owners, their reputation was tarnished, and so they stopped breeding pigs, the farrowing sheds sitting dark, empty, and overrun with cobwebs when we returned in the final months. The remaining pigs at the farm ultimately sent to slaughter and never replaced. But by then it was hard to see the closure as much of a victory, knowing so much more about the sheer scale and inherent unyielding cruelty of the animal agriculture industry than we had in those early days. I knew the focus had to be on the system as a whole, not on shutting down individual facilities. My court case was taken over from the police by the Director of Public Prosecutions, who determined that the charges were a little overboard, dismissing them and forcing the police to take a new approach. So I was then charged under the Surveillance Devices Act in New South Wales, a perfectly legitimate law intended to protect privacy and prevent things like hidden cameras being placed in bathrooms, now used for the first time to target animal activists. 4 counts of obtaining footage and photographs inside pig farms and slaughterhouses, and 6 counts of publishing it. Australia's first ever ag-gag case. One of those publication charges was for the gas chamber footage. After 2 years of minor court hearings, my case went to a 3-day trial last year. The police turned up with smug expressions and crates full of evidence, including many of the items they'd taken from me in the raid, but also things like metadata records from the photos I'd uploaded, which gave them the date and time and the model and serial number of the camera used. My phone records, which put me in the vicinity of the farms on the date and time the photos were taken. My bank records, pages and pages of incriminating text messages stored on my unencrypted phone. But we were optimistic. For one thing, in the Australian Constitution, there's an implied freedom of political communication, and a precedent had been set many years earlier by the High Court, establishing that issues of animal welfare are absolutely political and in the public interest, suggesting the prohibition of footage and photos crucial to having informed discussions about animal welfare would have been unconstitutional. But it didn't get to that because the police were unable to prove that they'd obtained the correct authorisation to lay the charges in the first place, a mistake the magistrate referred to as utter incompetence, forcing him to throw out the charges just 1 hour into the 3-day trial. And so instead of facing a potential 5 years in prison for those charges, I was able to return to working on our new film. And at the start of this year, 2.5 years since my possessions were taken, I received them all back, although the hard drives containing unseen footage were corrupted and inaccessible. Ambitiously, I'd set a premiere date for Dominion at the end of March this year in Melbourne. February came and we still didn't have a narrator. The script was unfinished. I was still watching and editing footage around the clock. When I tried to sleep, I'd lie awake for hours, stressing that I wasn't going to get it done in time, while other members of our team were off gathering more footage, desperately trying to fill in as many gaps as we could. Too late now to postpone the premiere and subsequent tour. We got in touch with Sean Monson, who created the 2005 film Earthlings, and as soon as he saw some of the rough cuts, he contacted Joaquin Phoenix, who agreed to narrate with his partner Rooney Mara. And so 1 week before the premiere, I got on a plane to Los Angeles, met with Sean, who drove me to the couple's Hollywood home and recorded the narration in their living room. And on the flight back home, I started cutting it up. Then 3 days before the premiere, I'd completed the original edit. But now every time I tried to export it, a process that takes about 10 hours, it would inevitably crash somewhere along the way. The cinema was calling and asking for it to be delivered immediately, or else we'd forfeit our booking. Thankfully, it occurred to me that even with some of the best hardware available, running 4 ultra-high-definition screens for a project containing thousands of hours of ultra-high-definition footage was a little too resource-intensive, so I disabled 3 of the screens and the export completed successfully 2 days before the premiere. It then premiered to a sold-out audience of 900, followed by a near-sellout tour around the country, and then in the UK, the US, and Canada. By the time of those international screenings, I'd completed the final edit with 3 additional narrators. Dominion uses drones, hidden and handheld cameras to explore the dark underbelly of modern animal agriculture, questioning the morality and validity of humankind's dominion over the animal kingdom, and challenging the notion so pervasive throughout our history's most abhorrent injustices, that might equals right, that perceived superiority is the only justification needed to commit horrific acts of violence and oppression. It's the culmination of 7 years of investigations, research, and personal risk and sacrifice, exposing the brutal, everyday reality of these industries more comprehensively than ever before, and making a clear case for the urgency and importance of animal rights. The Dominion Animal Rights March in Melbourne following the Australian screening tour saw 3,000 people taken to the streets, compared to 800 from the largest march prior. The film is now available for free for online streaming and download at dominionmovement.com, or on DVD and Blu-ray, which you can order online or from our stall over that way. Our intention with Dominion is not to break or depress its viewers, but to empower them. Not just to turn non-vegans into vegans, although it's definitely doing that, but also to turn vegans into activists, sparking a new fire or rekindling an old one. To serve as a tool for education and outreach, to encourage activists to rise together for a common goal to which we've never been closer. To force transparency on industries dependent on secrecy, and to give some small shred of meaning to the suffering and deaths of the many thousands of animals we had to leave behind along the way. It's time to move away from this superiority complex, this idea of our right of dominion that tells us we can exploit and use others as we please if we view them as inferior to ourselves. The weak, the vulnerable, the defenseless deserve from us protection, not subjugation. Their cries, their screams, and their voices deserve to be heard, to be amplified, not silenced behind closed doors and clever marketing. It's not a question of treatment, bigger cages, smaller stocking densities, or less painful gas. It's not a question of the worst offenders or rogue operators. It's a question of who we are as a nation and as a species where we can not only allow but normalize and incentivize the enslavement and killing of thinking, feeling individuals by the billions, most of them just babies. Most of us have been taught our whole lives that eating and using animals is normal, natural, and necessary, and that we can somehow do so while still calling ourselves animal lovers. We've been taught not to question or analyze the world around us, but to just accept things the way they are and vehemently defend what is familiar to us, even at the expense of our own moral consistency. I believe I speak on behalf of everyone here and every good person when given the opportunity to see for themselves the brutal reality of what they've been supporting every time they purchase meat, dairy, eggs, leather, wool, fur, that we don't accept it. We can't stand by and let this continue. It's no longer enough to be vegan alone. We have a moral obligation to do everything in our power to make the world see the truth about the way humankind treats animals. To speak up even if our voice shakes. To not be afraid of what might happen to us in retaliation from industries under threat. Because when their walls of secrecy have crumbled beyond repair, fear is their only remaining weapon, but truth and kindness will forever be ours. We must be the light no matter how dark it gets. It's never been easier for anyone to see inside farms and slaughterhouses and to understand the entire process. And we're going to continue making it easier, but these tools like Dominion and the Aussie Farms repository website are only valuable to the extent that they're used and promoted by activists. There's no single best way to get active, just get active. Do what you're good at or learn what you have to learn in order to do what you need to do. Everyone has something unique they can offer this movement. Just last month, a large group of us occupied the rooftop of the Strathalbyn slaughterhouse for 17 hours, preventing them from killing that day and drawing unprecedented mainstream media attention towards the footage we captured inside it for Dominion. Actions like these are going to continue until these facilities cease to operate. Let's move together towards a world that celebrates kindness, decency, and compassion, not violence and oppression. Let's not vilify those who have been compelled through circumstance, tradition, or ignorance to commit horrible acts on behalf of people who have been sold a lie, but instead help animal farmers transition to sustainable, ethical businesses and end subsidies and incentives for businesses built on suffering, and push beyond a patriotism, a national identity rooted in archaic fantasies of cowboys and masculine supremacy. If we are to love our nation, let it be a nation that values love, not cold indifference and numbness to the suffering all around us. Until we are all free from oppression, none of us are free from obligation. Thank you.